There comes a season, usually somewhere in the late 50s or the 60s, when the mower stops being a chore and turns into a negotiation. The knees file a complaint on the slope. The back files one at the trailer gate. And a very reasonable idea shows up. Put something green and low on the ground, something that spreads on its own and fills in and stays short, and take the machine out of the picture for good. That instinct is right, and it deserves better than the scolding it usually gets. Mowing is the most visible chore a yard owns. It runs on a schedule every 7 to 10 days from spring to frost. It's loud, it's mechanical, and it announces itself, which means anyone can measure exactly how many hours of a life it's eating. Getting rid of a scheduled machine-shaped chore looks like a clean win, and on paper it is. What the plant tag leaves out is where the work goes. Cover ground with a spreading plant instead of turf, and the labor stays right where it was. What changes is its posture and the fact that it stops showing up on a calendar. The mowing hour vanishes, and in its place comes an hour in June on hands and knees, picking maple seedlings out of a mat too thick to see into. Then another one in August. Then a Saturday in October tracing runners out of the hosta bed and along the driveway seam. Nobody puts that on a calendar. It just accumulates in the exact position a 65-year-old body least wants to spend an afternoon. So the question worth asking at the garden center is not how to stop mowing. It's which spreading habit decides whether the work that remains happens standing up or down on the ground. And the good news is that this is knowable in advance. It's written into how the plant travels, and it's the same answer in every yard. 5 things control what a ground cover costs a body over 10 years. How it spreads. What it does when it reaches an edge. Whether weeds can get up through it. What happens to the hole when part of it dies. And what it takes to get rid of it if the answer turns out to be no. Price per flat isn't on that list. Neither is the photograph on the label, and neither is the word carefree. Start with the mechanism because it drives the other 4. A rhizome is a stem that travels underground. It runs horizontally a few inches down, roots as it goes, and shoves up new shoots wherever it feels like it. Mint is the one everybody has already met. You plant a little pot of it by the back step, and 3 years later it's coming up through the lawn on the other side of the walk, and there was never a moment where you could see it happening. Rhizomes are the leak behind the drywall. By the time there's a stain on the ceiling, the pipe has been running for a while. A stolon is the same idea above the soil. It's a runner that lies flat on the ground, and everywhere a node touches down, it puts out roots and starts a new crown. Strawberries do it. Bermuda grass does it. Bugleweed does it beautifully. Stolons are visible, which sounds better. And in one way, it is. You can see the raid coming. The trouble is that a runner that has rooted at 8 points along its length is now 8 plants, and separating them from the lawn means following a line at ground level with your fingers. The third habit is the self-seeder. The parent plant stays put and throws seed instead. New plants appear in the gravel, in the bed, in the crack by the step, and they appear where you can see them, which matters more than it sounds. A young seedling comes out of soft ground with a long-handled hoe while you're upright and holding a cup of coffee. That's the whole reason mechanism belongs first. A self-seeder is standing work. A stoloniferous spreader is kneeling work that you can at least see. A rhizomatous spreader is kneeling work plus digging work. And it's the only one of the 3 where being thorough matters because a piece of rhizome left in the soil is not debris. It's a cutting. It'll be a plant by the end of the month. Tags almost never use those words, but they signal the habit anyway if you know the code. Vigorous, fast spreading, fills in quickly, naturalizes readily, forms a dense mat, and excellent for hard-to-mow slopes all mean the same thing in plain English. This plant will reach your edges and somebody is going to have to decide where it stops. That somebody is holding the trowel. Purdue Extension's consumer horticulture pages skip the euphemism entirely on common periwinkle and print 3 words in a row that nurseries never print. Do not plant. Second criterion, edge behavior, which really means what's on the other side. A ground cover doesn't have edges. Gardeners have edges. The same plant is a completely different commitment depending on whether its border is a concrete walk, a lawn, a perennial bed, a neighbor's fence line, or a stretch of county woods. Concrete is a wall, lawn is an invitation. And that's why the identical plant under a shade tree in a bed, ringed with pavers, is a mild decision, while the same plant on an open slope that runs down to a creek is a decision somebody will still be dealing with in 20 years. Third, weed penetrability, and this one gets assumed away more than any other. A dense mat is not the same thing as a weed-proof mat. Dense foliage does suppress some germination, absolutely. But a mat is also a superb seed bed. It catches falling leaves and holds them, which is exactly the moist, undisturbed litter layer that maple, ash, violet, and garlic mustard seed want. The weeds that come up inside a ground cover come up through it. And by the time one is tall enough to notice from standing height, it's rooted under the mat. You can't spot it from above. And in most of these plantings, you can't spray it either because a broadleaf herbicide that kills the weed kills the ground cover too. It's hands. It's always hands. Fourth, dieback and gap behavior. Every one of these plantings is a monoculture, which means it fails the way monocultures fail, all at once in patches. Disease takes a circle. Winter with no snow cover takes the exposed side. Drought takes the strip along the driveway, and the hole doesn't heal politely from the middle. Weeds get it first, and the repair is planting plugs, one at a time, at ground level, on a spring morning. Fifth, removability from a standing position. Ask it plainly before you buy. If this turns out to be wrong for me in 7 years, or if a house changes hands, what does undoing it involve? There is an enormous difference between a plant you can smother with cardboard and mulch in one season and a plant whose published control instructions include the word excavate. Same 5 questions for all 7 plants coming up. Bugleweed, periwinkle, creeping jenny, lily of the valley, pachysandra, English ivy, and ribbongrass. The rubric doesn't get to shift to make anything look worse than it is, and a couple of these are genuinely good plants that got sold into the wrong job. Bugleweed, ajuga, is the first, and it fails at the edge. It's a stoloniferous spreader, hardy from zone 3 all the way to zone 10, and it will grow in nearly any light level, which is a real virtue. North Carolina State's Extension Plant Database recommends it for cool, shady corners where grass gives up, and then adds the sentence people skip. Avoid planting it near perennial beds or lawns because its spreading nature causes removal problems. What that looks like in practice is little islands of ajuga appearing out in the turf, several feet clear of the bed, each one from a runner that crossed the line last summer and rooted. Getting them out is a kneeling job by definition, because the crown is at soil level and it's threaded into the grass roots. Ajuga's second problem lands in the 4th criterion. The Texas A and M Plant Disease Handbook lists southern blight on ajuga, caused by a soil fungus called Sclerotium rolfsi. Plants suddenly turn yellow and die in patches during warm, humid weather, worse in poorly drained soil, with the stem bases rotting brown or black and a white mold at the base carrying small reddish-tan bodies called sclerotia. Those overwinter. A dense mat with poor air circulation around the stems is the ideal setup for it. So the very density that makes it look like a finished lawn substitute is what sets up the bare circle you'll be replanting. Periwinkle, Vinca minor, is the same edge failure with a much longer reach. Its arching stems root where the tips touch down, so every runner ends in a new center of the colony rather than a dead end, and it's evergreen, which is exactly why people fall for it. But in February, it still looks like a decision you got right. The problem is that it doesn't recognize a bedline, a mower edge, or a property boundary. It's listed as invasive across a long list of states, from Connecticut and New York through Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee, out to Oregon and Washington, and the Tennessee Invasive Plant Council describes it forming dense mats along the forest floor that displace native ground layer plants. Those listings are regional, and that matters. Periwinkle in a bounded courtyard in a dry western county is not the same object as periwinkle at the back fence of a lot that touches woods in the Ohio Valley. Removal is where periwinkle really charges you. Pulling it works about as well as pulling ivy, which is to say it lifts a satisfying blanket and leaves behind every stem fragment with a note on it, and those root again. Hand pulling alone doesn't finish it. You end up back in the same square yard the following spring in the same position. Creeping jenny, Lysimachia nummularia, is the clearest example of the weed problem. Its mat is essentially 1 leaf thick, a flat doily of round leaves with stems that root at nearly every node they touch. Anything germinating underneath simply comes up through it, and weeding inside it is genuinely awful because pulling one dandelion lifts a hand-sized raft of jenny, tears the stems in 4 places, and each of those breaks is a new plant. Wisconsin's Department of Natural Resources classifies it as restricted, exempting the gold and yellow-leaved cultivars, and their guidance for removal is to make sure you take out all stems, stem fragments, and roots because the fragments reroot. The habitat list they publish is the part homeowners should weigh. moist forests, floodplain forests, swamps, wet meadows, stream borders, lawns, and roadside ditches. It travels on water. A planting at the top of a slope with a drainage swale at the bottom is a planting with an exit. Lily of the Valley belongs to the weed group too, for a reason that sounds like a technicality until you live with it. It's deciduous. The foliage dies back, so a plant sold as ground cover isn't covering ground for a good stretch of the year. And in a hot, dry August, it browns off early and hands you open soil right when summer annual weeds are looking for some. Underneath, it's rhizomatous, and North Carolina State notes its dense rhizomes spread and choke out other plants. With invasive reports from Wisconsin and Arkansas, weeding inside a rhizome mat is a trap. Every spade cut through it is propagation, so the more thoroughly you clean it, the more colony you've made. There's a second thing worth saying plainly and without drama. All parts of Lily of the Valley contain cardiac glycosides and saponins. Extension listings rate the poison severity low and note that serious symptoms come from consuming a real quantity of it. So this isn't a plant that hurts anyone by being in a yard. But it produces bright red berries at ankle height in a bed. And if grandchildren under about 5 are in that yard regularly, that's a fair reason to put it somewhere else. And I'll admit the honest tension here. Nothing else smells like it in May. Pachysandra is the dieback case, and it's the one that turns the whole premise inside out. Japanese Pachysandra spreads by shallow horizontal rhizomes, stands 8 to 12 inches tall, runs from zone 5 to zone 8, and genuinely resents full sun. The Morton Arboretum also flags winter dieback in years with little or no snow cover and poor drought tolerance. Then there's Volutella blight, which the University of Maryland Extension and UConn's Integrated Pest Management Program both document in detail. Brown or black leaf blotches that develop target-like concentric rings, water-soaked stem cankers that girdle and kill the stems, and pink masses of spores on the infected tissue in wet weather. Plants die in patches, and the pattern in the bed is typically circular. Set Maryland's management list beside the knee question. Avoid overhead irrigation. Thin the planting to improve air circulation. Clean fallen leaves and debris out of the bed so moisture isn't trapped. Every one of those is a ground-level hands-in-it task, repeated not once. And their suggested method for thinning a stand is to run a mower over it at the highest setting. That's the joke at the center of this whole category, delivered without any irony by a university extension service. The plant that was supposed to end the mowing gets mowed to keep it alive. English ivy is where the criteria stop being about your Saturday and start being about the county. On the ground, it spreads by vegetative stem growth, and as long as it stays flat, it stays juvenile and doesn't reproduce by seed. Give it something vertical and it climbs using root-like holdfasts, and climbing changes the plant. Mature ivy flowers and fruits. Washington's Noxious Weed Board reports that roughly 70% of ivy seed is viable and that a plant can produce thousands of fruits in a year. Birds take it from there. So a bed by the porch becomes a seed source for the woodlot behind the neighborhood, which is the second problem the card of low maintenance never mentions. On the tree itself, the damage is mechanical and slow. Ivy shades out understory and overstory foliage, and the added weight in the canopy makes a tree more likely to come apart in a wind or ice storm. Down at the base, it packs against the trunk and buries the root flare, holding moisture on bark that needs to be dry. 4 ivy cultivars, 3 English and 1 Atlantic, are Class C noxious weeds in Washington and sit on the state quarantine list, meaning it's prohibited to buy, sell, or transport them there. Oregon lists it as a noxious weed as well. Regional again, and worth checking rather than assuming. Removal is the punchline. North Carolina State's control publication calls hand removal very labor-intensive, notes that many vines grow back from the roots and that the plant returns from small stem segments, and instructs you to come back to the site regularly to pull regrowth. Their non-chemical alternative for a ground infestation is mowing, and they specify it has to be frequent like mowing a lawn. To escape the ivy you planted to stop mowing, you mow. Ribbon grass is the last one, and it's the most serious removal problem on this list. The variegated ornamental Phalaris arundinacea variety picta is the striped white and green grass sold for damp corners and rain gardens. It spreads by rhizomes that form a thick, fibrous mat at or just below the soil surface, loaded with dormant buds, and its seed ripens in late June and can germinate right away, moving by water, wildlife, footwear, and mowers. Wisconsin classifies ribbon grass as restricted. Massachusetts prohibits it, and Washington lists reed canary grass as a Class C noxious weed. Wisconsin's own control menu tells you everything you need to know about what removal costs. Hand pulling. Mowing 3 times a year. Prescribed burning for 5 to 6 years. Tilling, or sod removal, 8 to 18 inches deep. And the note that combining methods over a couple of years may be necessary. 8 to 18 inches deep isn't gardening, it's excavation, and no part of it happens standing up with a long-handled tool. Before any of this turns into a blanket condemnation, the honest half. Several of these are excellent plants that were sold for the wrong job, and the fair verdict is conditional. Ajuga in a small bed, ringed on all sides by hard surface in soil that drains, is a lovely thing that takes light foot traffic and colors up in deep shade where almost nothing else will. Periwinkle on a steep bank nobody should be walking on anyway. Bounded by pavement in a region where it isn't listed. Holds soil and stays green in January, and that's a real job well done. Creeping Jenny is superb in a container or a hanging basket where it can spill and be thrown out in November, and nowhere near moving water, ever. Lily of the Valley in a strip between a house wall and a walk, boxed on 4 sides, earns its keep for 2 weeks in May on scent alone. Pachysandra in dry shade under mature trees where turf has already surrendered, in a bed with a real edge and a region where it isn't escaping, is still one of the few things that works there, disease risk accepted. Ribbon grass belongs in a sunken pot with a solid bottom. And English ivy is the one where I can't build much of a case at all for open ground in most of the country, though as a wall or trellis plant kept strictly off trees, in a place that doesn't list it, people manage it. Checking whether your state lists any of these takes about 2 minutes. Search your state's name with the phrase invasive plant list, which lands you on the Agriculture Department, the Natural Resources Agency, or the Land Grant Extension Service. The United States Department of Agriculture's National Invasive Species Information Center gathers those by location, and EDD Maps shows county-level records. Do it before the trip, not after the flats are in the trunk. Which brings this to what actually works, because the answer was never going to be one perfect plant. A low-knee ground layer has 4 parts, and each one closes a hole the other 3 leave open. The plant comes first, matched to the site and to your spine. Sun with some foot traffic, and fine fescue is the honest answer. A blend of creeping red, chewings, and hard fescues, left long, cut once or twice a year, with the University of Minnesota's turf program recommending that single cut in fall. Dutch white clover or microclover mixed into existing turf pulls its own nitrogen out of the air, holds color in drought, and keeps flowering low enough to mow at 3 inches. A sunny, sharply drained strip along a walk takes creeping time, which handles light traffic and asks for almost nothing except drainage. Deep, dry shade under a maple is where you stop negotiating and accept that nothing green is going to be low effort there. Second, a hard edge, and this is the piece that does the actual knee saving. A mow strip of pavers, a concrete band, or steel edging standing an inch or 2 above the soil line converts a kneeling job into a standing one, because a runner that meets a raised edge has to climb over the top of it in plain sight, where a long-handled edger takes it off in one pass. Buried edging has to sit deeper than the rhizomes travel, or they simply duck underneath it, which is why an edge that only goes down 2 inches is decoration. Third, the mulch or gravel decision, which is really the decision to stop planting. Some ground should carry no plant at all, the ring under a tree, the shaded strip on the north side, the awkward wedge by the downspout. 2 to 4 inches of mulch, spread as a wide flat ring and never mounted against the trunk with the root flare left visible, handles that ground for a year at a time and can be topped up from a standing position with a shovel. Fourth, 1 pass a year, on your feet. Late in the season, walk the hard edges with a string trimmer or an edger and cut everything that crossed, 10 minutes per 100 feet. That single pass is what keeps Criterion 2 from ever becoming Criterion 5, because a runner caught at the edge in year 1 is a snip, and the same runner ignored for 4 years is a colony with a root system halfway under the lawn. None of the 4 does the job alone. The plant reduces the total work but can't govern itself. The edge decides your posture but doesn't cover ground. The mulch covers what nothing should be planted in but doesn't stop anything from crossing into it. And the annual pass catches what escaped, but only if there's an edge to walk and a small enough perimeter to be worth walking. Put the 4 together, and the yard asks less of you each year instead of more, which is the actual thing being bought here. If you've inherited one of these from whoever owned the house before you, I'd genuinely like to know which one and what it took to get on top of it. Because those stories are the most useful information in this whole subject, and none of it is written down anywhere. Drop it in the comments. If this saved you from a flat of something charming, a like helps it reach the next person standing in that aisle, and subscribing means the next one on choosing plants around a body that has opinions finds you on its own.